Hello everyone. I hope you are uncommonly well today. It's New Year's Day. I hope you had a very happy Christmas and are enjoying New Year's Day, and also to remind you not to be too disappointed if you don't get New Year's resolutions done. Some people do, but every day of the year is the beginning of the rest of the year, so you can just start over every day. And so today I'd like to thank you for coming. For those of you who've donated also, it's very helpful and very much appreciated. And also, if you are new here, please go to the link in the description box and go over to the post on which I've placed this video and see everything else there, plus a summarization of what I have spoken about today. And so I want to get started and encourage you to go and get dressed in something pretty. You know, we are having winter here, and it's pretty grim, but I found that, and of course the clothing is heavier, is not as interesting as the summer clothing, but if I found to have a couple of colorful wraps helps. And I have already been up and done the dishes and after breakfast, and have been on my walk, have swept. I wanted to encourage you to sweep. If you cannot get started, just sweep. That somehow gets your brain going, I think, for some people, maybe not everyone. And also, if you're having trouble focusing, just make your list and focus on one thing. Don't think about anything else, just do one thing. It does help, and we all need to have a way of focusing and keeping ourselves stable. So today also, if you would like, I will be reading some things, and I will let you know, just in case you don't want to listen, you can go on to something else or maybe another one of my videos. I'll have a little talk with you first about getting ready and getting your appearance the best you can. One of the things you can do in these grim times, these grim political times, one of the most wonderful, best thing you can do is to dress a little better, to take care of yourself a little better, help your children to be well dressed and presentable, and tell them how to take care of themselves, and just dress a little more formally, even in the home. Also, to develop some home, even if you live alone, develop some things you do all the time, no matter what. And one of the things that I like to do that you might like to adopt is, if you get up too early and you just don't want to get into anything yet, is to do a walkthrough in your house. Just do a walkthrough and take note of how everything is going and what it's looking like and what needs to be changed, what needs to be fixed, what needs to be cleaned. Just kind of walk through, and after a while you'll feel a little bit better. I think it's not too good to sit a long time. It does have an effect on your mind. It's better to get up and have a walk through your house. And it seems to be a steadying factor. Now, many people think that being a homemaker is mindless, that you don't accomplish anything. I've heard that before. But you compare it to some of the mindless factory jobs or the mindless office jobs that apparently take a lot of brain power, but really don't, at the end of the life, there's nothing to show for it, except maybe a bit more in the bank. But this is not true for the homemaker. There are many things that she does that can account for her time, and particularly the care and love she has for those in her charge, her family. So don't ever think. Also, those of you who are wanting to homeschool or who are homeschooling, when you get to starting to doubt yourself, or you're listening to other people say things about it, even if you might have these questions about, I don't know, maybe they should have more of this or more of that, and you go looking for books and you go looking for more stuff. If you can't find everything you'd like to have for homeschooling, remember that even if all you do is keep your children with you at home, or they go where you go, that you're still doing a wonderful job and a better job than anyone else can, because you love them, and you're also keeping them away from an institution. You're not outsourcing them, and you're not outsourcing your own responsibilities. And just by keeping them with you, and just by keeping it in the education in the family, you're already doing a far better job than any institution, any government institution can do. And I know some people will say, well, if only I could afford a Christian school or a private school. Look, homeschool is a private school. And you can name your school, and you can tell the children you're in a private school, and that's what they can tell their friends or relatives. And you're already doing a better job than anybody can in a public school. And you can you can have a certificate made up. You can do a graduation ceremony. I've known many homeschool families that did graduation ceremonies for their children. And anything they can do, you can do better at home. Don't ever doubt yourself and your abilities, because God made you tailor-made for that child, and you are the best thing for them. And you already, just by not letting them go with the herd, you are already doing better. And you will see, it won't show up at first. You'll have your doubts, but you will see in the end that it was worth it. So if you want to go on to homemaking now, if you want something better, let's say that you're living in a situation that is not ideal and that you have been wanting to advance from that. You know, people in the West used to be able to improve themselves. They'd start out with a little place, and then they'd sell that and move on, and they would improve their lives, and they would make money, and they would make a profit, and they would go and build again. But now in the situation that we're in, a lot of people feel stuck. But I have been told over the years this concept of the Bible talking about being a good steward. And that means just taking care of what you have in hopes that you will attain something better. And so being a good steward, let's just talk about this in the physical sense, in the sense of material things around you. If you want to, I was always told, if you want to improve your lot, if you want to get a better place to live or better whatever, take care, be a good steward of what you have. That just means a good caretaker. Be a good caretaker of what you have. Do it to perfection, and you will at least show yourself that you're in earnest, that you mean what you say when you say, I want to do better, I want to have a different place to live, I want to move away from here. Just do the best you can. And one of the things that solidified this idea for me was watching years ago on the web. There were these Romani gypsies in Texas, and the young married couples would start out in a little fifth wheel, what you call a holiday caravan trailer, and that's where they would live, and until they would advance themselves, and they would sell that and then move up to a bigger one, and then pretty soon they'd get in a house. Well, one of the things that impressed me so much is these girls would take a toothbrush and a cleaning agent and clean the inside of where the hinges are on the doors of these things, and then the windows, and they kept these things spotlessly clean, and so that, they wouldn't deteriorate, because things like that tend to deteriorate if they're neglected, just like a house. And so, but they knew they weren't going to be there forever, and by the time they had their first child, they'd move up into a better unit to live in, and then pretty soon they would have a normal type house. So just be a good steward. That means caretaker of what you have. Do it to perfection, with the idea in your mind as you enjoy it, clean it, decorate it, that you are practicing for the better house. I have heard so many young girls say, I really need to learn to clean up my room before I get married so that I can at least take care of my house. And a lot of girls will say, I wish that I had been a better steward of my own bedroom, because then I got married and I had a dining room to clean up, and I had a living room to clean up, and then I had a laundry room. So there's all this responsibility, that doubled their work. So if you're home, and whether you're a boy or a girl, be a good steward of that little space that you've been given to live in while you're at home, and just be an excellent steward, because that will help you when you have to move into something bigger. You'll be a good steward of that too. Isn't there something in the Bible that says he who is faithful with little will be faithful with much? So if you want to have more, and I'm talking about maybe a better location, a better house, just a better life, take care of where you are right now, and you're going to find that it won't be so overwhelming when you have to move. So that's my little lecture on that. I have quite a bit of experience in that realm, actually. And so your entire life at home is largely dependent on your own attitudes and your own plans, because nobody's going to rescue you from your house and from your responsibilities. So your entire path is going to have to be plotted by you. And even if you don't think you can make it, at least make plans. Doesn't the Bible say, where there are no goals, where there are no plans, the people perish? So you have to at least have some plans. And that brings me to this little idea of a little journal, just a little tiny book. You can make one yourself. You don't even have to buy one. And I just prefer pieces of paper this size, and you can put them in a book form. But I wanted to tell you something about a lady who said, this is just from an old article that I read years ago, and it was about a lady who grew up knowing about diaries and journals, but thought that diaries were intended for people to record everything. And so her life was kind of non-adventurous, and it became too boring to write just the sameness every day. But then she discovered the idea of the journal and what it was for. And she said she had been through some very, traumatizing times in her life where things were not going very well, and life was not pleasant for her. And so she decided to keep a journal. And she said this was the reason she did it. She said, I started keeping a closer track of myself in a journal for the same reason a ship's captain keeps a log: to fix my position, chart a course, and in times of particularly bad weather, maintain my bearings. So she says, now, if I'm deprived of that first morning hour to myself, the rest of the day has a compromised, undirected feeling to it. That's why I say we all need something to give us a beginning, such as getting dressed up, making a list. It gives you some kind of start. And she said when she didn't catch that first hour of the morning to herself for that journaling, the rest of the day has a compromised, undirected feeling to it. And such is the value of these small black copybooks that if the one I am writing in is misplaced, I am bereft until it is recovered. And conversely, when it is found, so am I. Yes, we all need something to give us our stability and our bearings. And these habits and these rituals and the journaling, I believe, is really, really important. Now, for journaling, as she said in here, it was to chart her course. Let me just see if I can find it again. She said it was to chart her course as a captain keeps a log. Now, on a ship, what's valuable about that was that no matter how rough things were, even if there were pirates, no matter what, there was the ship's log, and it could be counted on to figure out what happened to everybody or what took place. And so no matter what, the ship's log had to record all this. Someone had to record it all. She said, I kept it for the same reason a ship's captain keeps a log, to fix my position. They had their instruments to tell what their longitude and latitude were and how far away they were from something and where they were before this and where they were going, to chart a course, and they would plot the course as to which way they were going to go. And that's why I say these lists are just charting your course. And it would be nice to have a little mini journal and to chart your course for the day or for the week, or just, I have things I'd like to do at the back of the book. I have things I'd eventually like to do, and that's like charting my course. And it charts your course, and in times of particularly bad weather, maintain your bearings. Now, you might want to look up something about what it's like to maintain your bearings, to stay steady. And a homemaker has to know all these things, because sometimes, now maybe it won't ever happen to you, but sometimes there's going to be somebody or something or some event that's going to sabotage your whole idea of homemaking, homeschooling, whatever it is you want to do. They're going to sabotage and try to bury the value of it in your mind and to intimidate you. So you have to have the idea that it doesn't matter what anyone says or anything that happens, that you're going to completely chart your course and keep going. I was in the 1980s intimidated a lot, and a lot of things were said to homemakers in those days that were very discouraging and caused a lot of women to just give up and throw up their hands and decide to go to work or not to do the things that they had that they wanted to do and knew were to be right to do. But with me, I tended to, I wasn't, no matter how bad it was, I didn't quit. And with a lot of you, it's going to have to be like that. It's going to be tough, but you've got to determine that no matter what people say, you're not going to quit. And also, speaking of people who will try to sabotage everything and discourage, they'll say things like, they might say things like this, and hopefully they won't, but they'll say things like, you're not paying your way. Well, you're just mooching off of your husband. Well, you're costing the government money. Or this is a good way to get your kids taken away from you. Well, you're not developing your mind. Or, goodness, you could probably list some things people say to you. So this leads me into this tyrant business, is that we've had these types of people around us forever who always target people who are content, or I don't know if they're jealous or what, but they get an idea in their head that they need to aggravate some people. And so the tyrant has his worst tantrum just before he gives up. And if you want to know that eventually people would leave me alone, because they knew that it wasn't, I even had women come to the door sometimes with a list back in the day when there was just the newspaper and the want ads, and show me they had circled all these jobs that I could apply for. And they only quit doing that when they finally realized it was a deeply held spiritual Christian conviction that I had, and it was a belief. Not that I didn't qualify or couldn't do it, and that I was going to live as a homemaker. And so years later, a lot of these women had to quit work for their health reasons, or even now because of the way the war is going, and are homemakers anyway. So their beliefs have been challenged. But one thing you could learn from is the book of Esther. I'm not going to read it all to you, but I'm not very good at summarizing things like this. So I'll just tell you in general what the story is. And so I would start with, say, chapter 2. I don't want to get into any of the arguments about why Esther was chosen queen and what all the stuff she had to go through in her period of refinement and learning the ways of the kingdom. I don't want to get into that. What I wanted to tell you about, I'll just try to summarize it, is that there was, as in all governments, there was a man named Haman who had been picked by the king as kind of like his right-hand man, I think, and given a lot of power. And this man kept taking more and more power, and he would go to the king and say, here, take your signet ring and sign this, because it means I can do this or this or this. And so the king did so. And isn't this the truth when you talk about the governors or the premiers or the prime ministers, is that somebody is monkeying with their power and getting things done through them, and they're just puppets, And so this man Haman, he wanted for the king to say, it's okay if people bow down to me. So Haman, whenever he walked by, people were supposed to bow down to him. Well, this man Mordecai was an Israelite, and he did not. It was against his religion to do this, so he wouldn't bow down to him. And so this made Haman, of course, most people that have power are very sensitive, and they cannot be refused. And the more that people resist them, the harder they scrunch down on them. And like I said, just before they lose everything, they start to have more and more bizarre demands. So if you'll read the book of Esther, you can see this pattern. And eventually, Haman was even more enraged because this man would not bow down to him. And because God had told Moses to tell his people in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not have any other god before me. And I guess that would include bowing down to anyone. And so he demanded that Mordecai, he said, and when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. Well, isn't that the way it is today? Things haven't changed, have they? So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. Now I believe Ahasuerus had another name. Can you think of? He was the king of Persia. What? I don't know why I can't remember the other name that he had. So he demanded. He said he didn't tell the king what kind of people they were, what their religion was, or what race they were, or anything like that, or their tribe, or anything. He didn't say that. And this is often what happens. He said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. So he didn't tell what they were. And I suppose most kings, being very busy, would let their helpers make the decisions or make the judgment. And he didn't even ask who they were. And he said, a certain people, their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasuries. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the money is given to you, and the people also, to do with them as seems good to you. And so he began his long plan to annihilate these people. And of course, the king probably wasn't even aware. He only knew what his servants and his messengers told him, isn't that just the same as any president or prime minister? They can't research everything, so they trust certain people to inform them, and then they listen to the wrong people, and these terrible tragedies and wars happen. And so Esther intervened and told the king about this terrible plot to kill her people. And so at the same time, this Haman decided that he was going to build a gallows to hang Mordecai. And so just in time, see, like I said, he began to get more and more extreme, more and more bizarre. Well, just in time, Esther uncovered the plot and went to the king and told him, and the king said, let the gallows that you built for, take the gallows that was built to hang Mordecai and hang Haman on them. And so we as God's people have to remember that everybody will get what they deserve, and I have never been, the homemaker cannot be upset. She cannot be in a constant state of upheaval, because it's not going to get her meals made, her dishes done, and let me tell you, life and death for the family is in the power of the homemakers making good, nutritious meals and food, and teaching their family how to eat and how to be healthy. And if she is too absorbed in what the government is doing all the time, then she cannot enjoy her home. And if there's nobody banging down your door and dragging you off somewhere, then you don't have to be upset. I remember when I first started homeschooling, the first few days I was, someone told me, well, you know, it's against the law and you can't do that. And so the truancy officer is going to come to your door and take the children. And you know, that really upset me, and I didn't sleep for several days. But then I realized, you start looking around, you think, nothing has happened, nobody's coming to get me. And of course, fear is the thing that controls people the most, is fear. And as Christians, we have to be careful, because the Bible says God has not given us the spirit of fear. See, that's so if you read that, but of power and a love and a sound mind. And what is the opposite of a sound mind? Fear. You cannot have a sound mind if you have a lot of fear. And so it says, God has not, you want to meditate on that sentence, because it's quite clever how it's written. God has not given us the power of fear. God has not given us fear. So you have to ask yourself the question, okay, God has not given it to us, so where did it come from? And so you start emphasizing each one of those words until you can sift the meaning out and draw it out. God has not given us fear, but of a spirit of fear, but of love and of a sound mind. And so I'll try to remember to put that in the text so you can go and look it up and dwell on it a little bit and emphasize the words. So, ladies, the entire life at home is largely up to your mood. So get yourself, take care of yourself, take care of your diet, and that means the best food you can possibly prepare, the very best, the freshest. Make sure you have a salad every day. And drink your little cut. I'd like to show you sometime how to cut a lemon. I cut it into 8 pieces, and I put it in a little dish in the refrigerator with a lid on it, and I squeeze out one of those little pieces in some warm water every morning, and then I have a salad every day. I eat other things during the day, but only homemade bread, only bread made at home with the best flour. If you can possibly find non-GMO ingredients, try to eat only food from the home. And also keep yourself cheerful and happy. Pamper yourself a little bit, because, and that's what, getting up and getting dressed is all about, is just pampering yourself and dressing yourself up. Why, even Esther, had to go through a period of refinement, and talked about the perfumes and oils and manners that she had to learn. And so, as a human being, let's take care of ourselves and dress up just a little bit better, especially in times where we lack confidence or in times of stress. Very important, ladies. And if you are living alone, even more important, because you don't have people around that you have to dress for, and it's very tempting just to kind of sink into apathy, and also to let your mind go. And so I think that in getting dressed, especially, you have to be in front of a mirror, you have to fix your hair, and those of you who wear makeup, it gives you a chance to look at yourself and to develop some idea of confidence, and get to look at your eyes, and you get to see whether you're developing a hardness in them. And so there is something to that. Even the pioneers on the Oregon Trail, when they reached down to wash their face in a pool of water or a stream, they would use that as a mirror. And I'm afraid too many women at home, especially Christian women, are convinced that it's too vain and that we shouldn't care how we look. And we've entered into a really bad period where people are not respected because they want to be neat and tidy and clean. And the idea is to be so casual that you're being you're too affectatious if you care about how you dress or how you keep house. And so you have to watch out for that, because if you let yourself go and you let your house go, then you'll lose your mind. And it's so important that, because it says God has given us a sound mind, and you don't want to throw that away, because a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Now, some of you are getting older, and there's always the temptation to say, you look back on your life, especially now that you're home. It's easier to start thinking about things and developing little regrets and thinking about what would have been or what you should have done and opportunities that you missed. And it's easy to browbeat yourself and while you're going through your house and doing things and seeing things that need to be done, and start questioning, where did I go wrong? And then you start going back and analyzing it. But I have not found that to be very fruitful, except to help you not to make the same error again. But I decided from now on to look around and say, where did I go right? And I think it's important for you to do that too. Why don't you think about that sometimes? Every time you start thinking about where you went wrong, because maybe things didn't go well for you in your home or with your children, and it's very easy to have a lot of self-doubt. Where did I go wrong? Why don't you think for a minute, where did I go right? And list some things in your mind of where you went right, so that when you're challenged, you can say, yes, but I also did this. And try to think of the things you did that were right. The other thing is to be very important to you would be to make your list and then ask God to bring it to fruition, to bless it, and to keep close to God at all times, to walk and talk with God constantly in your life, and not be ashamed to be praying, and to be a praying woman. That's where you can do a lot of that on your walks, on your Austenite walks. Now, also today, I would like to read to you this book, The Jane Austen Diet, because he had so many different chapters. And as you recall, I had read one chapter called Jane Austen Eats Carbs. Jane Austen eats fresh stuff. I've read that to you before, garden stuff. And then the mind-body connection, which I just love, and I could probably read that one again. But I never did finish the meat chapter because I wasn't all that interested in it, and some of their some of their meat-eating habits, like going on a hunt, just didn't appeal to me too much. But I decided to read it because it was in the book and I had read the other things and I wanted to see what he had said about it. And he had done a lot of research of his own. And in reading this, I don't mean to tell you what to do. You decide whether or not you want to eat meat. I noticed that they ate a lot of fish, and I'm the daughter of a fisherman, and grew up on salmon and seafood, and so I wanted to tell you that it's up to you. I'm not trying to push meat eating on you, and I'm not trying to push meat eating, and it's just up to you. Everybody makes up their own mind, and if you want to stop right now and turn this off and go on to another video, that's fine with me. But I am going to finish reading the chapter because of some of the things he said I have found to be very thought-provoking. I will not read some of the recipes because they're Old English recipes and they just don't sound too good. But I noticed in a book I read called Simple Social Graces, or The Benevolence of Manners by Linda Lichter, I've mentioned this to you, that she analyzed the Victorian era, and she had a section on what they ate, and she mentioned how many types of meat they would have at the table at the same time. Now we are, ever since I was little, you only served one meat. Like we had smoked salmon with our dinner with potatoes, and then maybe the next night we would have moose meat or something like that, and then the next night. But you never had them all on the table at the same time unless you were at a church potluck. But we never, and we still don't. We have only maybe one type of protein, and then several different other types of dishes that are like one starch and one vegetable, and because that's the way we find it works better for us. So let's hear what he has to say. Jane Austen eats meat, and so if you feel like this is not for you, then you're welcome to move on. Because of the advent of modern supplements, people who ate more meat were essentially gulping down the historic equivalent of more vitamins. They were healthier, taller, and stronger. The most extreme example came in the early 1900s when the Icelandic anthropologist Wilhelm Stephenson spent a year living among the Inuit of the Canadian Arctic. Now, I'm familiar with them because I grew up in Alaska, and I've known how they preserved their food for winter, which wouldn't appeal to you. I won't even explain it, but it was explained in a book called Tisha, Tisha. I've forgotten who the author was, but it was a young school teacher that went up to Alaska, I believe in the 1940s, to teach school, who described how they saved their food for the winter. And so anyway, this is what he says. The Inuit subsisted almost entirely off fatty meat from caribou, salmon, eggs, and raw liver, vitamin C, and got very little exercise in the winter months. They should have been in a wretched state, said Stephenson, but to the contrary, they seemed to me the healthiest people I have ever lived with. Obviously, that was one of the reasons for the failure of John Franklin. So was it Sir John Franklin that went to find the inside passage? And they were scientists on this ship, and they did not adapt to the Inuits' way of life, and so they got very sick and froze to death, many of them, and they would not eat the food that kept all these Inuits alive for generations, and also the way that they heated their houses and the way that they dressed had a big difference. And so the ship, that scientific ship that went through, got stuck in the ice and was a terrible failure. And it's so sad. And you can find out more about that on a documentary that I think you could probably see somewhere online. It was during Queen Victoria's day. As a matter of fact, I believe that the ship was found and the wood from the ship was brought back to England and a desk was built out of it and then given to President Lincoln. I think it's still in the White House. Obviously, Austen and her characters were not of the Arctic Inuit persuasion. Heaven help Mr. Woodhouse if it snows more than a foot. They preferred their rounded English fare of vegetables, fruit, and a smattering of bread and other carbs, but meat unquestionably bulked out their diet. Following the advice in popular cookbooks like The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy, gentlefolk like Darcy and Bingley would have sat down to dinner with more than half of the table covered in meat dishes. Regency elegance still reigned. These weren't medieval moments for gnawing and belching into the nearest turkey leg. Nobody in Austen world eats more than a dainty slice of meat at a time. But nevertheless, interesting things happen when the majority of your calories come from meat. Now, you have to realize in these movies that you see, especially from the 1990s, when you see the dinners, and in fact, I think the movie Emma from the Miramax edition opens up with a Christmas dinner and the table all laid out, and there's a big, I think it's a turkey. That a lot of those actors and actresses are vegans. They don't really care. They are just acting, and he's writing a book here where he's just stating the facts that they did eat meat. And so that's all he's saying. And, of course, he's persuaded that it's good. And so we find people can tolerate meat eating. And in the Bible, in the New Testament, where it talked about people that didn't eat meat, how they could be offended by those who did eat meat, that the non-eat meater was considered the weaker brother, and that people had to be careful not to offend them, because, of course, the main point was to keep them faithful to the Christian message and not to be offended enough that they would leave the church. But the non-meat eater was considered the weaker brother, and that he would be offended because he had this conviction that people shouldn't eat meat, but that the Christian was told not to offend them, not to eat meat around them if it offended them. It's just like any of us. If we're on some kind of a strict diet, we don't want the rest of the family keeping things in the refrigerator that we can't have because it would cause us to stumble. And so this was what this was all about, was, you just have to be careful around the weaker brother. Eating a slightly higher ratio of protein and fat, less of carbs and sugar, enables your pancreas to produce more of the hormone glucagon. Acting like insulin in reverse, glucagon signals your body to burn its own energy reserves, body fat, rather than rely on instant energy from carbs or sugar. Returning to the healthier glucagon levels is the primary reason people tend to lose excess body fat so quickly when they swap out carbs for meat. It is also one of the top secrets for how people like Austen effortlessly maintain their weight without ever technically dieting or starving themselves. There's a reason why the most approved snacks in Jane's novels usually involve meat. Go and eat, Emma says, recommending another slice of cold meat to a hungry Frank Churchill in need of a quick snack. Protein and fat are the only foods that keep your body in fat-burning mode. Paradoxically, meat is the only true fat-free snack there is. And while period dramas might make it look like there's an awful lot of meat on the tables of Austen world, this was mostly a matter of show. Another social cue that the wealthy could afford these vitamin-packed proteins in abundance. Regency tables, however, functioned more like elegant, variety-rich buffets. People weren't expected to eat everything in sight. Instead, the habit and custom, wrote social observer John Ashton, is that people made a judicious and careful selection from this little bazaar of good things, winding up perhaps with little more than a slice of turkey or a sausage on their plates. Served one of these magnificent feasts at an inn in 1801, Austen jokes about the superabundance, saying that she and her companions could not with the utmost exertion consume above the 20th part of the beef. This is because all meat has a built-in satiety regulator. In other words, it's very difficult to eat large quantities of it. Since protein and fat are digested slowly, they fill you up quicker and satiate you longer than carbs and sugar. For instance, most people find it near impossible to eat a dozen eggs, but can easily polish off a typical bowl of pasta, about the same number of calories, and still feel hungry afterwards. This appears to have been common since in Austen's day. The most opulent Regency dinners always started with a first course of predominantly meat dishes. Then, only after the diners started to fill up on the meat would the starchier and sweeter dishes appear in the second and third courses. Now, to translate all of this into the reality of modern life, where three-course dinners are slightly harder to come by, perhaps you've noticed I've avoided one term throughout this chapter with noticeable fear and trembling. That is, describing Austen as being on the same sort of cringe, high-protein diet program. Did you say shudderings of horror, Jane? Quite right. I avoided the high-protein label because it isn't technically true. Jane never forced herself to avoid bread or sweets, as we've already seen, and she certainly embraced the bounty of English produce with progressive zeal, as we'll see later. But for those who like things to be labeled nice and tidy, I think we can safely define Austen as happily living on meat priority diet. That is, when meat was on the table, she instinctively knew what to put her fork into first. Like the Bates in Emma and the cash-strapped Dashwoods in Sense and Sensibility, Jane didn't always have the luxury of living the full Regency meat life, but she prioritized it when it came. In 1805, when Jane received the Regency version of a meat gift basket, 2 plump and delicious pheasants from a generous friend, the meat naturally took precedence. "We shall live upon pheasants, no bad life," she told her sister. More valuable and more nutritious, the choice was easy. 3 centuries later, this meat priority pattern is still the only protein diet for the real world. For instance, when you have a steak and potato, don't nix the potato, just eat more of the steak. When you're tackling a plate of meatballs and spaghetti, eat more meatballs than spaghetti. After all, when refreshments are served at Pemberley in Pride and Prejudice, there's cake and fruit to enjoy, but meat is profoundly and conspicuously listed first. In came the servants with the cold meat, cake, and a variety of the finest fruits in season. So, the William Pitt stop. Part 2. I'm afraid our first William Pitt stop didn't cover the most fascinating and perhaps the most important aspect of the Austen relationship with fat, the omega balance. Like us, Jane's diet naturally included essential fatty acids, omega-3s and omega-6s. They're essential because both are crucial to health, but balance is key. Historically, people eating traditional diets like Jane consumed far fewer omega-6s than we do today. This is cause for concern since omega-6s, while helpful, are also biologically inflammatory. Unlike omega-3s, that counteract damaging inflammation throughout the body, an overabundance of omega-6 in our diet can worsen it. Many health experts now see the highly lopsided omega ratio in modern Western diets, often as high as 15 to 1, 15 times more omega-6s than omega-3s, as an obvious link in the current surge of inflammatory conditions from heart disease to cancer. In stark contrast, Austen, like most traditional eaters before the 20th century, had an omega ratio in her diet of about 2 to 1, only twice as many as omega-6s as omega-3s, as much healthier and more natural balance. So how did she do it? Quite effortlessly, in fact, by sticking to historic food rules many of us have forgotten. So here's a little title he uses here, Field to Fork. The cows grazing in Austen World's pastures aren't just bucolic, they are crucial to better health. When livestock are free to roam outside, eating their natural diet of grass and an occasional bug, their meat develops naturally higher levels of omega-3s, not to mention more vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. You see, that's a processed food because all that stuff is processed through the cow. I wouldn't eat it. What we would now call grass-fed beef has roughly the same amount of healthy omega-3s as omega-6s. Most modern beef, however, raised in a factory feedlot, has about 7 times as many omega-6s as omega-3s, a consequence of the high-grain diet they are now fed, a high-inflammatory diet that ultimately passes on more omega-6s to us. Though admittedly, I'm with you, traditionally raised grass-fed meat isn't cheap, but it does return the true value of meat to more accurate Regency levels. That butcher meat is expensive is a frequent observation in Jane's letters. So here's the second point he makes: eat wild. Wild meat, like fish and game, were must-haves at the Regency tables. In Pride and Prejudice, Mrs. Bennet launches into a tizzy when she can't get a bit of fish for her special dinner, while Sir John kindly fills the Dashwoods larder with a present of game in Sense and Sensibility. Both options prove excellent for keeping one's omega balance in check. Fish is a no-brainer with its high omega-3 content in cold water species, but game is also a healthy option. The benefit of eating more greens and grubs in the wild makes game another rich source of omega-3s. Regency tables were replete with an incredible variety of game, from partridge to pigeon. Never ate the stuff. Though don't get your petticoats in a tangle, I'm not advising you to pick up a musket, traipse down to Longbourn, and shoot as many birds as you please. That was one of the quotes from one of the stories. Rather just head to the supermarket. Most are now stocked with exotic game options. A Regency favorite. And then he's got another subtitle here: Butter Up. To really get into the Regency omega groove, you'll have to rethink your relationship with vegetable oil. I'm not talking about olive oil, which has been around for thousands of years and frequently made its way into Regency salads, but industrial newcomers like canola oil, corn oil, soybean, safflower, and sunflower oil. I noticed when we're looking for some kind of commercial bread that had all the good stuff in it and none of the bad stuff, that you'd be reading it and it'd have all this nice natural grains in it, and then you would look and they'd sabotage it because it had canola oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, and all those oils you don't want. These highly processed vegetable oils were only introduced into American diets in the 1920s, and they have high amounts of omega-6s and are largely responsible for the omega imbalance in modern diets. Yet they were totally absent from Austen's kitchen and everybody else's kitchen in Europe and America from the 19th century backward. Instead, people almost entirely relied on animal fats to cook with: tallow, lard, suet, and Austen's personal favorite, butter. Not only do these animal fats from traditionally raised livestock have a healthier omega balance, they are also more heat stable. Unlike modern vegetable oils that chemically oxidize when heated in the skillet, creating highly toxic compounds called aldehydes that can damage our cells, animal fats remain much more molecularly stable when heated. Butter, of course, was the Regency standby. Rich in vitamin A and healthy fats from pasture-raised cows, you can get closest to the flavorful butter Austen would have eaten by sticking with grass-fed options, such as Kerrygold butter from Ireland, now widely available. Now, ladies, if you want me to read more of this, I will. I have read, I believe, most of the chapters in here, almost all of them, and I would be happy to read it again, some of it again, and I hope that you got a lot of things done today, because this was the purpose of Homemakers Radio, was so that you'd have something to listen to while you did some things, and have a little company with it, the way we used to listen to the radio back in the 1950s when we had to wash the dishes, which was a long, tedious task if you were in a large family. And also, we would, when my children were growing up, they could come and read to me while I was doing something that I had to do that they couldn't do for me. And so, ladies, I hope this has been valuable to you, and that you will leave a comment if you get some time. So thanks for listening, and I'm honored that you came, and I hope it's been worth your time, and I will talk to you later. Bye.